He knew what he felt, but he didn't know what to do about it. Feelings that emerged with the softness of the unexpected, something that can't be planned or controlled. He constantly found himself lost in his own mind, trying to understand what had changed, trying to comprehend the intensity of a sensation that deep down terrified him. Every moment their eyes met, there was something that couldn't be denied. The attraction, the connection, the natural impulse every human feels when getting close to another in a visceral way. But at the same time, there was a deep, almost physical fear of taking the next step. He observed the situation from a distance, with the caution that had always accompanied him in every aspect of his life. He didn't give in to feelings without first analyzing, weighing, and considering the consequences. An analytical mind, always alert to the details, to the patterns and subtle changes that would escape the notice of many. This was his way, and it always had been. An almost automatic behavior, an instinct deeply rooted. Now, however, there was something new, something he didn't know how to interpret or manage. There was you, and with you came a turbulence he could not foresee. He constantly wondered, can I handle what's coming? Will my temperament be an obstacle? Or is this just a fear, something I'm creating in my head to avoid the vulnerability that scares me? What he felt for you was clear, but the depth of that feeling left him insecure. He didn't want to hurt you, didn't want his temperament to become a wall between you, but he also didn't want to deceive himself. And the only way to prevent that from happening was to keep his distance, even though deep down he knew that this distance only fueled his doubts. He thought a lot about what made his temperament so difficult to deal with. It wasn't just the anger, although that was the most obvious part. It wasn't the way he could shut down, distant and impenetrable, when something upset him. It was the intensity of everything, as if every little internal change he felt exploded, making his body's and mind's reactions disproportionate to the stimuli he received. But the problem wasn't anger itself. Most of the time, he knew how to control it. What worried him was the impatience, the emotional imbalance, the tendency to get irritated by things that seemed irrelevant to others. Sometimes he wanted to be lighter, calmer, more accepting, but that wasn't his natural reflection. There was something in his personality that made him prone to see everything as a threat or pressure, something that needed to be controlled or resolved immediately. And now with you, he felt the weight of this personality in a way he had never felt before. The mere fact of being close to you made him want to behave differently, but it also scared him. The fear that his temperament might be enough to push you away kept him at a distance, even as the attraction to you pulled him closer. He knew that his reactions could be hard to understand for someone who didn't share the same sensitivity and perception of the world. He wondered if to you his reactions might seem excessive, if his need for control could come off as distant or even cold. He didn't want you to see that. He didn't want his feelings to be mistaken for coldness or indifference. The truth was, he cared a lot, more than he wanted to admit. I don't want to hurt you, he thought. I don't want to scare you. I can't be this burden for you. It was a constant struggle between the desire to get closer and the fear that his very nature would be an insurmountable obstacle. The longing to be lighter, to be someone you could trust, someone who didn't have to be avoided because of something he couldn't control. The reality was that he still didn't know if he could trust himself or even if he could become someone better for you. It was something he couldn't simply set aside, as if his very being were at stake. And in that dilemma, he lost himself more and more, trying to figure out if his temperament was something he could control enough to be a good partner. On those nights when he was alone with his thoughts, he tried to view his situation from a more rational perspective. He wondered if the fear of hurting someone who cared about him was simply distorting the way he saw the situation. Maybe that was it, an internal insecurity, a fear of not being good enough. I worry too much, he thought. I'm making a drama out of something that could be simple, but what he felt for you wasn't simple. There was no simplicity when it came to such deep feelings and strong temperaments. He knew that for you, it might be hard to understand this internal confusion. If he were able to open up completely, who knows? Maybe you would understand him, perhaps even love him in a different way. But he feared that it could become a burden. He felt that if you saw the rawer side of who he was, the unrevealed layers of his character, you might pull away. And deep down, he didn't want you to see him that way, filled with fear and uncertainty. Can I handle this? He thought. Am I capable of changing? Or am I being cruel to myself, asking for something I will never be? What he still couldn't realize was that, while he was so absorbed in his own analysis, you were watching him too. For you, he wasn't an equation to be solved. He wasn't a puzzle that needed to be unraveled to be loved. You saw him for what he was, in a simpler, more genuine way. You knew he had his complexities, but you also understood that the beauty lay in learning to comprehend who he was, without rushing to change anything. He worried so much about the flaws in his temperament that he didn't notice that for you, his sincerity and moments of vulnerability were already more than enough. But he, trapped in his own insecurities, still couldn't see that. He was at a breaking point, where truth blended with fear, and vulnerability seemed to be the only path to the authenticity he desired so deeply. But would he be able to take that step? Would he be able to trust in you and what he felt? Or would his temperament be the definitive obstacle between him and happiness? Time passed and doubt remained unyielding in his mind. He watched you from a distance, trying to analyze each movement, each gesture. There was a tension in the air, an invisible game between the desire to draw closer and the fear of pulling away even more. He was lost in a whirlwind of thoughts, as if by diving into what he felt, he would drown in the intensity of his own emotions. What he didn't understand was that perhaps it was precisely the quest for control that was keeping him away from something that could be good, something genuine. Sometimes he found himself imagining how different things would be if he could relax, if he could for just a moment be lighter, more open. He knew he needed to learn to deal with his own shadows before committing to any kind of relationship, but what he didn't realize was how much this desire to transform into something better might actually be stripping away his authenticity. He wanted to be better for you, but he didn't know how to remain true to who he really was while trying to change. What he didn't know, but perhaps you already did, was that genuine transformation never occurs when we avoid who we are. True transformation begins with accepting who we are, not from trying to escape the parts of ourselves we fear the most. But he was far from realizing this. For him, the need to change seemed like the only solution for both of you to find a balance. He wondered, what if I never change? What if I keep being this person who has intense reactions? What if that's too much for you? Is that something you would want to face? These questions consumed him deeply because he knew there was something magnificent about his connection with you, yet at the same time, he feared that his own nature might be a hindrance. And no matter how hard he tried not to think about it, he knew that the fear of losing you pushed him into a never-ending spiral of questions. But you didn't seem to think the same way. For you, there was something about his way of being that, far from pushing you away, drew you in even more. You didn't see his temperament as an insurmountable obstacle, but rather as a characteristic to be understood. You understood that the intensity of his personality was not a flaw, but a facet of who he was, something that reflected his honesty, his passion for life and for the truth. However, there were moments when you saw his internal struggle, and that made you question, can he free himself from this fear? Or will the weight of his insecurities prevent him from being happy by my side? But when you looked at him, what you saw was not a being full of flaws and fears. You saw someone who cared deeply, someone with a sincere heart who, despite his internal conflicts, was trying in some way to protect you from any pain that might arise. And that's where the story takes a turn. You didn't see what he feared to see. You didn't judge him for being who he was, but for what he could become by learning to accept himself. There was something about his personality that, to you, was irresistible. His ability to reflect on himself, to try to understand his own limitations, touched you deeply. You knew he was in a process of evolution, and that gave you a quiet hope that he could indeed overcome his own barriers. But all of this was happening so slowly. Every step he took toward confidence felt like an immense mountain, impossible to climb without an effort that seemed endless. You didn't want to pressure him. You didn't want him to feel that his transformation needed to be quick. You actually wanted him to know that you were there by his side as he discovered and adjusted himself. There was no rush, and for some reason, that bothered him more than anything else. If only I could be more at ease. If I had better control over my emotions, it would be easier for him. Easier for us, he thought, as he found himself reflecting once again on the possible flaws in his temperament. But perhaps his biggest mistake was not realizing that the true transformation he sought was more connected to acceptance than to a constant battle against himself. What he still didn't fully understand was that by trying to conform to the standards he believed were necessary to please someone, he was losing himself. And you, watching him, knew that true love isn't built on unrealistic expectations or the idea that we need to be something we're not in order to be worthy of love. It was in that moment, when he was about to withdraw once again, that something inside you compelled you to act. You realized that it might be the right time to reveal what you really thought about everything, without masks or fears. You understood that he was feeling isolated in his internal struggle, and perhaps, just perhaps, the key to making him feel more secure was your honesty with him. Vulnerability was what he needed most right now. Not more space or distance, but a true and fearless connection. You took a deep breath, sensing that the moment to speak had arrived. You could wait no longer. Your presence in his life had already been filled with silent glances and restrained gestures, but it was time to show that there was also something real between you, something beyond what he was trying to control. "I don't want you to change for me," you said, your voice calm yet firm, trying not to let on about the turmoil you were also feeling inside. "I see you, and I accept you as you are. There's no such thing as perfection, and you don't need to be different to be who you are with me." He looked at her, surprised. The tension between them seemed to slowly dissipate, as if he had lifted a huge weight off his shoulders. But at the same time, he was confused, unable to fully process the words he had just heard. "Are you not afraid?" he asked, almost in a whisper. The vulnerability he had feared now laid bare. "I am afraid," you replied honestly, "but that doesn't stop me from wanting to be with you. What matters to me is who you really are, and I know that if there's anything that needs to change, it will be something you decide to do for yourself, not for me." Those words sparked a transformation within him. He had never considered that change could come from such a genuine, simple place. It didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to fit into an external notion. He could be who he was, and that could be enough. To you, he was already enough. He smiled, a shy smile, almost relieved. In that moment, he understood what truly mattered. And the fear, while still present, no longer felt so overwhelming. From that moment on, he began to realize that what he feared most wasn't his imperfection, but rather not allowing imperfection to be a part of his connection with you. The acceptance you offered didn't demand a forced transformation, but a natural one grounded in trust and the freedom to be who he really was. He who had always seen himself as someone who needed to improve, control his impulses, and adjust his personality to fit others' expectations, now found himself faced with a new and liberating possibility. He didn't have to be someone different to be worthy of love. And for the first time, he began to question whether his temperament was, in fact, an essential part of who he was, something that, while challenging, also carried profound and authentic qualities. You didn't see him as someone to be corrected, but as someone who, despite his complexities, was already worthy of love. His gestures of patience and understanding were not a concession or an imposition. They were simply a reflection of genuine acceptance, an acceptance that allowed him to open up and see that he didn't need to fight against what he felt or who he was to have a place in your life. He took a deep breath, relief mixed with a sense of humility. The pressure he felt to be perfect began to slowly dissolve, giving way to a new understanding of what it meant to be in a relationship. It wasn't about hiding flaws or always trying to be better, but about being honest and vulnerable, allowing others to see us for who we truly are, even with our shadows. You moved closer and he didn't pull away. Something in that look, in that silent exchange, replaced the weight of his doubts with the lightness of trust. He knew that the journey wouldn't be easy, that there would still be moments of insecurity, but he also knew that he had in you a genuine support, someone willing to walk beside him with all the imperfections, hesitations, and fears he believed he needed to hide. In that moment, the internal struggle he carried didn't seem so overwhelming. Perhaps, in fact, the greatest change was the acceptance of who he was and the willingness to trust in that, not just in himself, but also in you. The steps no longer felt so heavy. They were small but firm, and together he and you began to discover that the beauty of a relationship wasn't in perfection or the absence of difficulties, but in the courage to be who you are, with all your complexities, and still choosing to be present, body and soul. What he hadn't understood before, but was beginning to realize clearly now, was that the biggest obstacle was not his temperament, but rather his lack of self-confidence and trust in the people around him. By being accepted by you, he began to accept himself, and that's when the true transformation started to take place. Not as an attempt to control who he was, but as a process of embracing his true essence. And for both of them, this was the beginning of something new. Be who you are, and the transformation will happen.